If your computer was built in the last 10 years and you can play video games on it now, you're very likely to be able to play Classic WoW at reasonable frame rates. During the Classic World of Warcraft demo playtesting, I ran quite a few benchmarks on my own to really see how it compared to a vanilla WoW client. I released a previous video that was testing this on a sandbox server, but in this video we're looking at the live World of Warcraft Classic demo server with actual mobs and player characters running around. For the full methodology and specs of the test machine, check the link in the video description for my previous video. But to cut to the chase, I stood at this location in Westfall on a vanilla client and on the Classic demo client, and then measured my frame rate for each of these locations for each client under a few different settings for the demo client and under the maximum settings for the vanilla client. Keep in mind the vanilla WoW client is limited to your monitor's frame rate in terms of the maximum frames possible. So I was limited to 144 frames per second on the vanilla client, so I limited the Classic demo client also to 144 frames at the upper end. With that said, the vanilla WoW client with maximum graphical settings, the Classic WoW client with the classic options enabled in the settings, and the Classic client with maximum graphical settings enabled all yielded pretty much exactly the same average frame rate of around 142 frames per second. In terms of lower frame times, or the 1% or 0.1% low frame times, the possibly surprising thing to a lot of people is that the vanilla client was actually worse overall than the Classic client, whether I was on the classic settings, the lowered classic settings, or the max possible settings. I found around a 33% improvement to the 1% low frame times. So although the average frame time was essentially the same between both clients, I found that the Classic client had about a 33 to 34% increase in the 1% low frame time. And this was true whether I was on the lowered classic settings or the maximum available graphical settings. So what this means, if your computer is able to run the vanilla WoW client at a good average frame rate, but sometimes felt a little laggy in busier situations, it's very likely that that same computer will feel the same average frame rate or better on the modern Classic client, but the sluggish feeling that you get occasionally during busy action times on screen won't actually be quite as bad on the Classic client. So the summary here is that the Classic client, for whatever purpose, whatever has happened over the years, Blizzard has optimized it in a way that allows it to really run a little more smoothly than what the old vanilla client was capable of. For those curious, I've also put my CPU and GPU usage on screen during my benchmark testing. It's very clear that when you run the modern Classic client on maximum settings, you will see somewhat increased use of your CPU, and especially your GPU usage will go up considerably. But if you pull back on those graphics options and go back to the classic settings, you'll find that your frame rate is very, very good. Your low frame rate is very, very good, and your CPU and GPU usage actually aren't that much different than what you would have seen on the original WoW vanilla client. So in summary, the Classic client is very well optimized in my opinion, given my limited testing in Westfall. We really will need to see full raids and other large world PvP events to get a great feel for it, but overall I'm very, very optimistic for what the Classic client is capable of. And this is great news for budget gamers, or anyone that just plays games casually and maybe even has just a built-in integrated GPU. You may find the Classic client actually holds up quite well for you. With that said, if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, that's all for today. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.